Evening, folks. David Brown here, President of the Ulster Farmers Union. Welcome you to our first webinar. Tonight's webinar is on increasing production efficiency. We'll have Francis Titterington, beef scientist, and Gillian Scoley, a dairy youngstock scientist from AFBI. Just a bit of housekeeping so that you're well informed from the outset. This will be recorded. So if a link will be sent out, so if you wish to watch it again, you can do so. And I suppose just to make it clear, we will have a Q&A, question and answer at the end with the panel. There is a Q&A button on your device. Probably if it's a computer you're on, a laptop or whatever, it should be along the bottom of the screen. Perhaps if you're on an iPad or phone, you might find that Q&A along the top. So don't be putting questions into the chat if that function is on your device. Put them into the Q&A. There will be a survey at the end. That survey is just to better inform those who are planning and organising these webinars over the coming weeks, if there are any improvements that we can make. So just, I suppose we expect this to last no longer than 1 hour. And at the outset, just to make you aware, there will be further webinars, and the one next week on a Tuesday evening again at 8 o'clock on the 3rd of October is on resilient grassland management. But tonight's is, as I said, on increasing production efficiency, and I'm going to hand over now to Elizabeth Magowan, Director of AFBI, to introduce it. And I'll see you later.
Thank you, David, very much, and hopefully you can hear me. And I was just wondering, Rachel, if you could confirm people can see my slides there, okay?
Yep.
Great, thank you. So good evening, everybody. Really pleased that you've been able to join us this evening. And we're really pleased now to be able to join forces with the UFU and AgriSearch to bring you this series of webinars, which are really designed to help you establish a win-win scenario on your farm. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to set the scene of why we're here delivering these webinars. So way back in the day, we had Granda Joe. About 70 years ago, Granda Joe here started farming. And it could be said that, you know, back in that day, farming was largely an extensive enterprise. And the key goal was to produce food, especially for a hungry population back then. And indeed, being that extensive farm, it probably was supporting biodiversity quite well and had good soil health. Now, like any good family in Northern Ireland, Granda Joe had a son called Joe Senior. And Joe Senior would have been farming maybe from the 70s, 80s and through the 90s. And, you know, really that's whenever we saw a period of intensification of farming, greater level of inputs and a greater level of outputs. And again, the policy agenda and the incentives there were very much to drive food production. But there was a recognition that we also had to start really managing the nitrogen and phosphorus coming out of our farming systems to protect our waterways. So Senior Joe in the more recent history has really had to work both to produce the food in an economically viable way, but also protect waterways through reducing nitrogen and phosphorus losses from the farm. Now Joe Senior has had a son, and that's Joe Junior. And Joe Junior currently is taking up the farm, and he has a lot more challenges ahead of him than even Grandpa Joe, who's still out there in his tractor, and Joe Senior. So going forward here, our younger people and our farmers of today are really having to both still produce that healthy, wholesome, safe food from our farms. But as they do that, we're going to have to increase the biodiversity on our farms again, improve soil health, continue to further reduce the nitrates and phosphates from our land. And now, as well as that, we're going to have to reduce those greenhouse gases, methane and nitrous oxide, as well as ammonia emissions. So there are more challenges ahead of us. But this series of webinars is very much to give you hope that the mad scientists in the labs are working away very hard on innovations and solutions and interventions for the farming industry. But in the meantime, there are lots and lots of things that you as a farming community can do right now. And if I refer back to a report which I had the pleasure of pulling together with a number of folk across the UK, it's on the CL website, and it really has a long list of options and their potential impact on a farm. So tonight, over the series of these next few weeks, we're going to focus in on a number of these areas. Tonight we're focusing in on increasing production efficiency, and specifically within that 24-month calving and 24-month slaughter, because those two practices are really quite material and will have quite a material impact on the carbon footprint of a farm. For example, you know, and what we'll do in the fifth webinar down on the 24th of October, we'll try and help you understand the impact of all these interventions on carbon footprinting and how to use carbon footprinting. But for tonight, these two practices have the potential to maybe reduce carbon footprint by anything between 5 and 10% on your farm. And indeed, if we hold the output on the farm and actually use some of that freed up land to plant trees, your carbon footprint could be reduced even further through carbon sequestration. So tonight, I'm delighted that Gillian and Francis are able to share with us now how exactly you can help to reduce your calving age and reduce your age of slaughter without losing overall profitability, and in doing so, reduce the impact to the environment. So over to you, Gillian and Francis. Thank you.
Yep. Hello, everyone. I'm Francis Titterington. I'm here with Gillian, and we're talking about increasing production efficiency. So, well, as Elizabeth touched on, we have, here's like Joe Senior's farm. Every farm's a system, and it has inputs and outputs, and there's a lot of things going on in the farm and how those inputs are used to make the outputs. Joe Senior would have been trying to minimise the inputs to get the maximum outputs. However, now things have slightly changed where we're optimising the inputs and optimising the outputs, because what we're also trying to reduce the emissions from the farm. So, well, how do we improve efficiency in the cattle herd? Efficiency in your cattle herd is held up by two pillars. You have genetics and you have management. Now, they're both very important and they can't be considered in isolation. Whenever you're trying to improve efficiency, you need to consider both of these elements. So I'm going to just talk a wee bit about genetics here. So if you're bringing cattle into your herd, you want to have the best genetics possible. So if you're buying cattle, you want to buy ones with proven genetics. If you're breeding cattle on farm, you'll need to get sires with suitable estimated breeding values, or EBVs, or predicted transmitting ability, PTA, and that means that the progeny born of these cattle will have a really good potential. The genetics are reflected in the performance of your animals. So if you have animals already in your herd, by monitoring their performance, that'll give you a good idea of your on-farm genetics. We're going to take a case study here and look at making informed decisions on choosing dams by comparing their progeny, and we'll use Bovis. So here's our case study farmer here. We have Arnold. Arnold is trying to decide which cows he is going to breed this year. Every year, Arnold uses the same Charlie stock bull to cover all his cows, and he's going to use Bovis, which is available for free through the government gateway to assess the performance of his cows and their progeny. So once you log on to Bovis, you can look at cows, and in this example, Arnold has cow A and cow B. These two tables show the progeny of these two cows. If we look, we'll zoom in at the first bit, and this shows the date of birth of cow A and cow B's progeny and the type and breed. Looking at the date of birth, you can see cow A, she's having one calf every year at the end of March, and that's pretty good. Arnold's happy with that. But if we look at cow B, you can see she starts off calving in March, then she slips into May, and the following year it's on into August. So you can see she's not quite hitting one calf per year. Arnold looks at the type and the breed of the progeny. You can see that there's 3 steers from each cow, and they're all Charlies. And we know that Arnold uses the same sire, so we'd expect the same performance from these cattle. We can see each individual animal, but if we look at the bottom, we can see the average performance of the progeny, and we'll zoom in there. So the weight, both cow A and cow B are having progeny at 320, 322 kilos, very similar. They both have the same fat class and conformation. However, Arnold can see that cow A's calves are being slaughtered at 23 months, compared with 28 months for cow B. This shows that cow B is having less efficient progeny. So Arnold's going to say, hasta la vista to cow B, but cow A, she'll be back. At the other end of the spectrum, it's not just cattle coming into your herd, it's also when they leave. So looking at the increase in efficiency by reducing age at slaughter. Now, this chart looks at cattle who were slaughtered in Northern Ireland in 2022. 39% were slaughtered under 24 months, 43% between 24 and 30 months, and 18% were slaughtered over 30. Now, that's taken from about 130,000 steers slaughtered last year. AFBI have done a study, and this looked at around 300,000 continental steers that were slaughtered, and it looks at the average weight for age of these steers. So we looked at cattle that were slaughtered at 22, 24, and 28 months old. And if we just look at the important bit, you can see that holding on 2 months from 22 months, you only got 3 kilograms increase in the carcass weight. And if you held on an extra 6 months from 22 to 28 months, that was only an extra 10 kilograms in the carcass weight. If we think of this as a day gain, you can see it's only 60 grams carcass weight per day. So you have to consider the inputs to make this gain, and is it worth it? So a quick overview of reducing age at slaughter. It is possible to finish the cattle at 22 months. However, you must consider, is this going to be optimal for your farm system? Can you afford the inputs to make this? The cattle that were finished later, they were heavier, but this increased price at slaughter is going to be offset by the higher production costs. Every day that animal's on your farm, it's costing you money. You have to house it, you have to feed it. You also have an opportunity cost. If you're holding an animal 6 months longer, that's 6 months where you could be bringing on the next batch of cattle. And also there's increased emissions. I said the animal's on your farm eating, that means the animal is also on your farm emitting. So estimates of around 360 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per animal for that 6 months. Just to give you a bit of an idea, that's the equivalent if you jumped in a Volkswagen Polo and drove from Belfast to Monaco. The next bit we're going to look at is growth monitoring and management. Now, I hate saying this because I know you've heard it before and it's very overused, but there's no better way to say it. You cannot manage what you do not measure. If you have beef, you'll be selling it by the kilogram, so it just makes sense. You really should know the weight of all your cattle. Even on the dairy side of the house, weight's a really important key performance indicator. Weight targets, they can help you monitor development of your heifers. For example, if you're hitting the weight targets, that means you're probably going to achieve puberty in time so that the animal can be served and carry a calf to full term and a calf early at 24 months. If you need help getting the growth targets for your animals, AFBI's growth monitoring tool can provide these growth targets for both dairy beef and replacement heifers in both dairy and beef. And how this works is you log on to your government gateway, you enter the animals you want to growth monitor, and it'll take all those animals off AFIS. You enter their weight, and it'll tell you the weight that we expect them to be at that stage of life and their weight for 3 months' time. And if you need help to achieve these targets, there's also a nutritional advice where you can put in the quality of your silage, and it'll tell you how much concentrate that animal needs to hit the growth target in 3 months' time and keep you on track to hit all those developmental milestones. So Bovis offers you all this information and it helps you to make the decisions. However, that's your job to make the decisions. And if you feel you need help for this, you can always contact your calf-free farm advisor for tailored advice. Now I'm going to hand over to Gillian here and she's going to tell you a wee bit more.
Thanks, Francis. So we're going to move on to the dairy side of the house here, and as Francis said, it's very important for you to meet targets within your system to ensure you're getting the best productivity. And the key dairy efficiency target within the dairy herd is to reach an age at first calving of 24 months. And we know that hitting that target is really important. some of the key benefits of hitting the 24-month target are a reduction in direct rearing costs. So that's around £2.87 per day per heifer for each day over 24 months of age. There's a reduction in carbon footprint if you meet the 24-month calving. This is generally because larger animals or animals that are around 30 months or so at the age of first calving, they'll eat more and then they'll emit more methane. And as well as that, if you have animals out grazing, larger animals have a larger grazing footprint and probably need more fertilizer as well. So that's getting you a bit of a reduction in carbon footprint. And the key benefits in terms of milk production and a productive lifespan, if you're entering the milking herd earlier, you're going to be able to have a longer productive life, and then you're getting an overall higher level of milk production throughout the lifetime. Now, AFBI made some blueprints about 15 or 20 years ago to try and target 24 months calving, and there have been some improvements made, but some recent calf analysis of Business Development Group members' herds in 2020, there was about 120 herds surveyed, highlighted an average AFC of 27.7 months. So we still have a bit to go. So we're going to look to see what kind of factors we can look at to try and improve this. So what kind of targets do we need to meet to get to the average age of first calving of 24 months? One of the key things that we need to do is make sure that we're breeding heifers on time and that they're meeting the breeding weight. And the breeding weight is usually about 55% of mature cow weight. So as Francis has said, to be able to meet this target and make sure that you're on track to meet the target, you have to monitor the animals regularly, and that involves regular weighing and also use of tools such as Bovis to try and monitor growth throughout the rearing process. To make sure that you're on track and for that 55% of mature weight at breeding, a key focus is what happens in the pre-weaning period. Now, it can seem like a very long way away at the point of breeding whenever you've got a newborn calf at your feet, but in that pre-wean period, the calf is at its most efficient in terms of nutrient usage, and it's really going to do the best for your herd if you can make the best growth possible during that period. Reports from the US have looked at the importance of daily live weight gain in the pre-wean period, and it really accounts for about 22% of the variation in first lactation milk yield, with each 100 grams of extra daily live weight gain through that period accounting for about a 100 kilo increase in milk yield during the first lactation. So that really highlights how important it is to try and get those gains in the pre-wean period. And although we might be feeding calves a level of milk replacer to meet those targets, we really want to sort of double the birth weight between birth and weaning, and that's a growth of around 0.8 kilos per day. And we're maybe feeding milk replacer to meet that 0.8 kilos per day. We don't really know if that's what we're going to get, because we find that when we go out on farm or we speak to farmers, or even in your own herd, you see that you're not getting the growth in that period that you're expecting, given the amount of milk replacer that you're feeding. So it's not just nutrition that can influence daily live weight gain. And this is what we found in one of the projects. So energy for growth is driven by retained energy after the requirements of maintenance energy have been taken care of. And for a 45 kilo calf, you need about 500 grams of milk replacer for maintenance energy alone. And that's providing that the situation and the environment that the calf is raised in is perfect and ideal for that calf. Anything that causes the calf any sort of physiological stress or ill health means that the nutrient utilization of that feed and the energy from the feed is going to be reduced. It's going to mean that there's higher requirements to keep themselves warm or to get the immune system to function. So whenever a calf is about from birth to about 4 weeks old, it has a thermoneutral zone of between 10 to 15 degrees. So that's the temperature at which the calf will be able to gain weight and regulate its own temperature. When the temperature dips below that, the calf's having to use energy from its feed to keep itself warm instead of for growth. When we add to that moisture in the environment, Relative humidity of above 80% can really start to cause a really big impact on the temperature and exacerbate the cold temperatures. So calves are cold and damp and they're not able to regulate their temperature, having to make use of more energy to regulate the temperature instead of putting that into growth. Then we add on elevated airspeed, so any sort of drafts in the accommodation, that can again impact the temperature, make it colder, drafty for the calf, and again, increasing the maintenance requirements of that calf, and meaning there's less room for, less energy for growth on top of the maintenance. So to try and get an idea of what it was like on Northern Irish dairy farms for calves, we went out onto 66 dairy farms across Northern Ireland within the OptiHouse project, and that was alongside the Caffrey Dairy Advisory team, so to see if we could factor in what was happening on the farms and how that was affecting the use of the nutrition. So on the 66 farms, we took some recordings of the environment, including temperature, relative humidity, and we also recorded live weight throughout the several visits that we went on. And as you can see from the table here, the average temperature on the farms within the calf rearing accommodation was 9.5 degrees. So that's below the lower critical temperature for a young calf. And calves were being housed at that temperature for nearly 60% of the time. So they were cold for a sustained period of time. When you add to that, we look at the mean relative humidity, it was 82.1%. So calves were also in damp housing. And this again was over 60% of the time. So we have calves already in cold stress and having a physiological requirement that's higher than the average maintenance needs. When we looked at airspeed, drafts on the farm weren't really an issue. In fact, we had the opposite in that ventilation on the calf houses weren't that great. We had a problem getting fresh air in and also getting rid of stale air. So the absence of ventilation altogether also poses a problem because we're not getting the fresh air in to remove the moisture from the house. So that's probably contributing to the fact that the calves were in a damp, cold environment for a longer period of time. So when we took the environmental data and the weight data and did a bit of modelling to see what kind of impact the factors were having on growth within the calves, if we just take these two factors circled in red, we can see that the time below 10 degrees, if calves were below that 10 degrees for over 50% of the time, they were gaining 70 grams less per day than calves that weren't held at that cold temperature. So that's missing out on 70 grams of growth already. When we look at the average straw dry matter that we found within the calf pens on the farm, in calves where the dry matter of the straw was less than 70%, so the straw was damp, again, we're losing out on another potential 70 grams of growth for those calves. So calves in a cold, damp environment, we're already losing out on 140 grams per day of growth. So if we're feeding to gain 800 grams per day, just by those two factors not being ideal, we're already down to 660 grams per day. So we're missing out on a lot of growth and putting a lot of cost into the feeding of calves and not getting the full benefit from it. So this really highlights how important managing the aspects of housing and accommodation and environment for calves are important within the calf rearing system, and making small changes and changes that we can manage ourselves can really help improve performance in the calves and improve the environment. So this is an example of what can be done. So this is the same calf house in a before and after, and you can decide yourself which environment you would prefer to live in. Whenever you're looking at your housing, you need to put yourself in the position of the calf. If you're a young calf, you're lying down for 80% of your day. Do you want to lie down in cold, damp straw and be in a cold environment? No, you're not going to be able to grow very well and your health could suffer. Now, we can't do much about the actual weather, unfortunately, but we can try and manage the microenvironment within the housing. So in order to try and help farmers do that on their farm and see what kind of factors they could improve, throughout some of the projects that we've carried out here recently, we've developed up a couple of online systems that are going to be released soon. So the Stamp Calf Defend Risk app is essentially an online tool that allows you to step through your management practices, your feeding practices and your housing with your vet or your advisor and identify areas of risk for the calf and see what things you can do to try and improve that before a calving season or during a calving season. We also have the OptiHouse online calf house design system, which we're aiming to release in the next couple of weeks. We're just waiting on a couple of final changes from the design company. And that's essentially going to allow you to either build a new calf house or input the information of your existing calf house and change different aspects about the build, about the design, about the materials used, any sort of ventilation, and see what kind of improvements you can get within your existing calf house. That could improve efficiency within your herd. And essentially what we want to try and do for calf rearers is to build a more competitive industry in Northern Ireland. We want to reduce levels of calf morbidity and mortality, which have pretty much stayed static for the last 50 years or so, reduce GHG emissions, and also we really want to improve the public image of calf rearing within Northern Ireland. So a very brief look forward, we currently have a couple of projects on the go which aim to see how the early life management and nutrient intake can affect future performance within dairy calves. So can we program that calf in very early life through how we manage it and what we feed it, to make it more efficient in terms of nutrient usage, that it'll grow better, be a healthier cow? Can we use those type of aspects as a future breeding index? And a recently started project funded by DAERA is going to look at anti-methanogenic feed additives, to see if we can use those in very early life to try and influence later life methane production. So that's just a couple of bits and pieces that we're doing at the minute. So just as an overview, really what we want to highlight is it's really important to set targets within your farm, within your business. If you're not setting targets, you have nothing to work towards and you're not aiming towards anything. And as part of that, it's really important to monitor your animals and monitor your business to see if you're meeting those targets. And if you're not, it gives you a bit of time to try and put something into place to make sure that you do meet them. Use all of the information that you have available. So things like the Bovis tool, things like the advice from the calf-free advisors, your vet, your nutritionist. Get all of the information that you can to be able to make informed decisions on your farm. And remember that it's not just one aspect that'll improve production efficiency on your farm. We need to look at genetics management and a whole host of things to try and improve production efficiency within the growing livestock. And I will hand back to Jason.
Thank you very, very much, Gillian, for that presentation. So now on the video, we are going to go into and look at a few videos that we'll be doing over the next few weeks. These are case studies from farms right across the province who we have been working with as part of the Beacon, Grass Check and DIP projects, and these farmers are an integral and vital part of AgriSearch's work, and we couldn't deliver those programs without their help and support. So this evening's video will feature Frank Turley, a beef farmer who farms with Father Paul near Downpatrick, James Henderson, a beef and sheep farmer who farms close to Gillian, and Hugh Harbison, a dairy farmer from Akidui.
Frank Turley from Downpatrick, farm in partnership with my father and mother, farming 500 acres, and we're a suckler cow to beef system. So this was all about here, where everything's a grass-based system here on a rotational grazing paddock-based system. The maximizing amount of grass we can grow. Everything through on the farm is brought through the beef and finished off grass. There's no concentrate or little to no concentrate finished on the farm. Cattle are sold under 24 months old, averaging about 310 to 15 kilos dead weight, the steers and heifers across the board. We grow as much grass as we can possibly, and we've now started to introduce a few other different types of sort of species and stuff on the farm. We're big into our clovers now, and clovers multi-species and stuff like that has started becoming a big part of the system in the past couple of years due to the dry weather in the summer times coming forward, and the more drought resistance, we're having to look and see other options on the farm to make sure we have fodder available for our cattle at all times of the year. Predominantly we're a spring calving herd. Cows start calving from the end of January onwards, and they're for about 9 weeks the cows will calve. Cows, one calf per year, so our calving index is about 363, and we're calving our heifers under 24 months old. Everything is calving in the early spring really because we're trying to get our cattle away before the 4 months of age and off grass. So the early spring, so the animal going into the winter time is a big animal when it's weaned off the cow. Our cattle are all kept on the keel in the winter time, so there's no sheds here, everything's on the keel, so it's a bigger animal to respond better to the keel in the outdoor system, and then as a bigger weaned animal hit in the grass the following year to be finished off grass the following season. Targets are really met with just, our big thing is trying to grow as good a quality forage in front of the cattle at all times, along with genetic merit. We're trying high ABV bulls, AI bulls coming through genetics onto the cows to try and have a bigger and better terminal sire coming across all the time for carcass gain and performance. Cattle are weighed about every 8 weeks in the grazing season when they're brought in, whenever they'll be dosed or whatever other maintenance is needed done on the way through, to constantly perform performance monitoring to make sure cattle are performing, and if they're not, we can adjust the system and bring them out and rebatch and allocate to different grasses, different groups or whatever, to try and maximise performance on them all the time.
My name's James Henderson. I'm farming here outside Kilkeel in County Down in the southeast corner of the county, along the coast. We're farming about 150 acres of land, and it's very much a grass-based system. We have both a lowland flock of sheep, 250 ewes, and we breed our ewe lambs as well, and then we have a dairy origin beef herd of between 80 and 90 calves are bought in every year, and they're taken through to beef at approximately 2-year-old. Along the way we have targets at weaning, we have targets at turnout, we have targets throughout our first grazing season at housing, and the important thing in the whole system is both grass quality, grass availability, and then good quality silage over the winter periods as well, just to be able to achieve those targets.
Hi, my name's Hugh Harbison, and I'm farming here in Nakadoo, which is between Nakadoo and Coleraine. We're milking 180 autumn calving cows, calving them all in 12 weeks, producing 8,000 litres off about 2 tonnes a meal, supplying Dale Farm with our milk. So we calve all our heifers at 20 more months. So for me, that starts off whenever the calf's born at this time of year. We ensure the calf gets lots of colostrum, and then we have a very vigorous vaccination policy for pneumonia, and then we regularly weigh the calves throughout the first year and then on into the second year. And then in terms of those animals, as they're coming to breeding now, we're making sure those animals are on really good grass at the minute, after grass from third cut silage, and we're ensuring they're on the right target and they're on the right and plane of nutrition for breeding in December.
Okay, then, so just maybe to sum up what we've covered so far in this webinar, increasing production efficiency isn't exactly a new message. It's one I'm sure you've all heard many times before, but it's still a very important one. It's about ensuring that you get optimal output for your inputs. This is not only good for the environment, but it's also good for your business, because when we don't get good outputs for our inputs, we have waste, and that means more costs and less income from you, and more emissions to the environment. Each of the 3 farmers featured in the video set targets. They regularly monitor performance against those targets, and if they are not meeting those targets, they take prompt action to address the issues. Francis Titterington outlined the Bovis tool, which was co-funded by AgriSearch and DERA, and is available for all farmers to use on the DERA Rural Portal. It enables beef farmers to monitor carcass gain without any data input whatsoever, and can also be used by both dairy and beef farmers to benchmark live weights of replacement heifers and other growing stock. Animal health is an absolutely critical component of production efficiency, and it all starts with those early days of calf management. Calf housing has a critical role to play in this. Gillian Scoley outlined how the OptiHouse project, which AgriSearch co-funded with DERA, by making small changes, can lead to very big improvements. There is a comprehensive OptiHouse booklet on calf house design available on the AgriSearch website, and I encourage you to download and read this because it's a very good comprehensive guide. AgriSearch and AFBI are obviously also continually looking at new research and new technologies, which will further boost efficiency and deliver environmental benefits. As Gillian mentioned, AFBI have recently commenced a new research project on early life programming, and AgriSearch's new PhD scholarships programme will be tackling many of these challenges, including improving the resilience of our grassland, which will be the topic for next week's webinar. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand over now to David Brown to chair the Q&A session.
Okay, folks, thank you to Gillian and to Francis, and indeed to our three farmers. I maybe encourage them to put on their cameras, because as we move to a Q&A, obviously we've a good turnout, 85 participants on screen tonight, but equally I always recognise the fact that sometimes the questions can be slow to get started and then come in a rush. But if you want to start putting questions in there, I'm very conscious, and probably there are a few buzzwords there that you'll not be unfamiliar with around efficiency, sustainability, and I suppose that message around increased productivity doesn't necessarily mean more. It is about optimizing inputs in order to optimize your output. So I'm looking, I suppose, towards the Q&A to see questions coming through, but recognizing the fact, as I say, that maybe I should have probably repeated that earlier on to ping those questions in even as we went through the presentations. But I suppose fundamentally to the panel, maybe if I could chuck one in there while we're waiting questions to arrive. When it comes to obviously the seasons that we have, and appreciating Frank and maybe James down there in County Down, maybe very different circumstances to some of the difficulties and struggles that the wet weather has brought this season. Do those challenges, and I'm maybe going to direct that to our farmers, do those challenges of changes in obviously weather conditions have an impact on the plans, on the ability to, for instance, rotationally graze or whatever other mechanisms you're doing to reduce costs on farm? And maybe I'm looking towards Hugh actually first there, and I don't know, Hugh, if you're behind that. You're behind the camera. Good to see you. I mean, that challenge of 180 cows, getting them out to grass.
How are you doing? Well, those 180 cows aren't at grass. It's a very simple answer.
All right.
No, it's been to be honest, it's been a very challenging year right from July. You can make any plan you want to, but if Mother Nature's against you, you can do nothing. But we just had to take opportunities whenever they came. We were very lucky we got silage, 3 really good cuts of silage off. They all seem to be really good quality, so that'll help our winter feeding this year. And we're buying straights and trying to minimise costs this year with our winter milk. But whenever we're fortunate enough to host farmers from the south, and they come up and they always ask me, have you made an autumn planner for your grazing? And I always laugh and say our autumn planner is just whenever the rainfall comes, it just stops. So you can't make all these plans, but sometimes you just have to play what's in front of you.
I'm sort of checking there that there hasn't come in any questions yet, folks, so don't be shy. Maybe turning then to Frank and indeed to James. Obviously, County Down, we sort of recognise here in the west from County Fermanagh that perhaps what you call a drought, we'd call a good summer, but equally, the challenges are maybe different. But in terms of grass growth, Frank, you talked there about moving towards multi-species, moving towards clovers and so forth. Have you found that much more resilient and much more efficient in terms of continuing to grow when the drought hits?
Yeah, definitely. The multi-species, we're definitely finding in the drier weather, we're getting anywhere from a week to 2 weeks longer in the grazing season, in the grazing with the dry weather, which hopefully sometimes with us, it's enough to get you over that hump for the next shower rain to come in to get the whole thing going again. But the big thing is the multi-species we're liking. Certain groups of cattle, we're not completely convinced that for beef cattle maybe that it's a harder one to monitor, but cows and calves respond very well to the multi-species, and I've had groups of cows with calves left on it pretty much all year from the grazing season. So we're in the middle of doing weigh-ins and stuff like that for performance to see how they compare to other groups on the standard grass mixes. But the multi-species is definitely buying us a bit more time in the drier weather. But again, then it's a double-edged sword, I suppose. Whenever it's wetter, there's more herbs and there's more clovers in it, so there's a lower dry matter content going into the cattle, so it's harder to keep them settled in the wet weather, and they do a bit more damage. It doesn't take the same trampling as the grass maybe would, perhaps, so we're moving them all a bit quicker than that end. So
yeah. Okay, we have a question through here, which I suppose is to all the speakers. So I'll maybe share that around. Appreciating James haven't brought you in yet, but for growing livestock, where do you see the biggest risk failing to achieve target livestock growth? And I suppose then for farmer speakers, how important is having livestock weights regularly in informing what actions to take? So maybe James, let you come in first on that.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're coming through now.
Yes, well, I suppose that we were speaking earlier there just about grass growth and things, and the fluctuation in growth is always a difficult issue, David, because the demand level is maybe slowly rising as weights gain on your swards, but you can have such a variation in grass growth. I know here you were talking on the weather, and as was Frank. Early, the month of May, we were doing well over our demand, and it was then that you have to try and conserve grass, because whenever we got to late June, and you folks probably over in the west were very happy, we were burnt out and had no grass, and for 2 weeks we had to feed surplus bales. Those bales were made three different weekends during the month of May. And it's things like that you, when you're measuring your grass, that you have to be able then to balance it out when you have a surplus, to have sufficient good quality silage to carry them through, to maintain a good growth rate throughout the season, because as they're growing, their demand level is rising gradually, and the fluctuation in grass growth and such changeable weather has really left it very, very difficult seasons. And there's no 2 years to see him,
Yeah. I'm conscious, in terms of livestock weights, that's something probably as beef farmers, both you and Frank are. I mean, do you want to comment on that? I mean, how better informed are you and what actions can you do or take whenever perhaps you're not reaching that target?
Well, I suppose you have to be looking in the young stock. Maybe you have to be looking at fecal egg counts and making sure those stock in their first year at grass, and I suppose it's the same for the young dairy heifers, that those aren't having an impact, and worm when necessary. And we try to keep our stock at grass and grass alone. We're not trying to feed meal. I know there are other people who are maybe supplementing with meal. But if I can make those really good bales in the early part of the season, they will hopefully carry me through those difficult periods. That's from where I'm coming anyway, David.
Yeah. I'll maybe turn to Gillian and Francis with the next question. Do you think Northern Ireland grassland farmers can achieve net zero emissions? Simple one for the scientists.
Yes, it's one for the scientists that'll be coming up in the next webinars, that we don't steal their thunder. The shorter answer is probably that we really don't have much choice but to do it. But we're going to have a webinar next week specifically on grassland, and then the 5th one in the series is all about carbon. I don't know if Elizabeth has anything to add.
Yeah, I think for me, looking at this, some farms will be able to be net zero, some farms will be able to be sub net zero, but there's a number of farms won't be. and they'll maybe be the more intensive farms, etc. So, I think on balance, however, will Northern Ireland farming be net zero? I also think that could be a challenge, if I'm being honest. But let's remember, it doesn't have to be. We are producing food. As long as we are reducing our carbon footprint and making our fair contribution to the UK net zero agenda, that's what's expected of us. So whilst we should absolutely strive and have the ambition for net zero on our farms, I would be very much of the opinion we shouldn't be putting that label on ourselves at this moment in time. And what we should be striving to do is reduce our methane emissions through all the practices that we're talking about tonight, through the methane inhibitors that are coming online, through reducing our nitrous oxide emissions from our grassland farming, through multi-species swards usage, etc., etc. So, let's not beat ourselves up just yet, and let's strive for low carbon farming as opposed to net zero carbon farming in the short term, at least.
Okay, I'm coming to Frank with the next question, and I appreciate and was interesting Gillian's point about the age of calving in the dairy sector. I mean, that focus on 24 months seems to be fairly topical in the suckler sector. And I suppose, Frank, do you see a reduction in the longevity of those suckler cows when aiming to calve at 24 months? Obviously, you've a particular breed there, fairly obvious. Lovely to see that video of them all moving on to the next pasture there. But calving at 24 months, what are the challenges? You're on mute there, Frank.
Sorry, yeah. Challenges. We're lucky enough. Our most of our cows that are coming through are half British Frisian, half Aberdeen Angus heifer. So they're reared well. It's back to their dairy bred animal. So they're reared, so it's back to the same as the dairy endpoints there. You're rearing and making sure you're making your targets on the way through calve whenever it's reared off milk, pre-bull weight, and making sure it's coming through and at a pre-calving weight. With the Angus, we're finding it isn't that hard to achieve now. We're doing it with no meal throughout the system with them. They're mealed well at weaning time. Make sure they're making their targets there, and then coming through on the good high quality grass throughout the rest of their life to bring them the whole way through. We're meeting targets with them all right then. And then at 24 months, it's back to say when they calve down, just making sure in that first year, particularly, they kept that good grass the whole way through, and they're pampered on their first year with the calve on them, and it's sticking to them the whole time. Like we've cows there calving now, and they're 12 years old, and they've had 10 calves, and they're going to calve down again there now with their 11th calf. And we've no intentions of culling them. They're still doing their job, and they're still one cow per calf per year, so there's no reason to cull that sort of way. So
yeah. Okay, one for Francis here. Maybe it's a bit pointed, this question, but where are farmers going wrong when they're killing cattle at 320 kilos at 30 months? Is that, and this is no reflection on breed, but how much of that is genetics and how much of it is management? Now, appreciating more traditional breeds and so on, that is not a poor target at all, but perhaps maybe this focus is on continentals. But genetics versus management, Francis?
Obviously, it's going to be it's a bit of both. It's very difficult to just answer that straight off. Like you say, obviously there are genetic limitations with certain breeds, but there's also going to be poor management, leading to things like that. But to be honest, that's nearly impossible. There's so many cattle, like thousands slaughtered. There's going to be different reasons. I can't really give you a one size fits all answer for that question, I'm afraid. But can I just move back to the 24-month calving, the previous one, just to say we do have evidence from Bovis where it shows that animals which calve younger, they tend to have lighter first progeny, so their first calf will be lighter than heifers calving at an older age. However, over the cow's entire life, it's going to produce more kilograms of progeny, so it's going to have more kilos of beef produced than one that's calving later. So that's certainly something to consider from the longevity point of view. And we didn't really see any difference in the age of cull whenever we analysed that as well.
Okay. I'll maybe turn to you, a dairy perspective in terms of multi-species. What benefits and I suppose have you found, and well, maybe some that you didn't expect, but equally taken on board the challenges that Frank referenced earlier, that perhaps it does need a little bit longer to recover, or not get the cattle on it for so long in a wet period. But what difference has that made to your system?
We've about 15 hectares of it in now on the grazing platform, and we've probably learned the hard way with the first paddock. We just treated it like one of our grassland paddocks and just grazed it every 21 days, and the chicory has nearly all left it after a year or two. But we've been left with a really good field of grass and clover, and that field has had no artificial nitrogen now for this is year 3 now, and it's grown the same amount of grass as the other fields that are getting artificial nitrogen. So in the first few years, we found that the deeper rooting structure of the chicory allowed better soil structure and better drainage from those fields. The challenges going forward for it is obviously persistence and weed control. So it's not it's not all perfect by any means, but I think it's an interesting tool to have in the box, and it's something that we'll probably keep trying to do going forward, I think. So
yeah. I'll maybe come back to you, James, on this one, around good quality silage. How might you define that? Obviously, those early bales you described, what sort of D-value, what sort of ME are you talking about there?
Yeah, well, the good quality bales are very useful during that drought period in the summertime, but I'm thinking of a D-value of 70 plus, and if we can, and I know it was difficult this year, you're talking, dry matter of upwards in 30%. And then hopefully AME heading for 12 and above, and protein somewhere in the region of the 14% if possible. But that has been a real challenge to get the silage in at all. Never mind the dry matter has been an issue for a whole lot of people this year. But I suppose that's the aim anyway.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's what the dairy farmers might call rocket fuel. But I'll come back maybe, Hugh, to you. The next point's around grazed grass. It's been difficult to manage. We appreciate the extremely wet and variable weather that we've had this year. This is rather direct, but why bother? Just put them in the shed and achieve much better performance on a consistent diet, which is much easier to regulate. And let you maybe take a dairy perspective on that one.
Because there's more to life than milking cows, probably. I like a good work-life balance. In April, May, and June, cows went out the grass, and it's just easier to manage, easier on the cow, easier on the farmer, which I don't think a lot of people take into consideration. I've got a young family, and I want to spend time with them. I don't want to be doing cubicles in the middle of the summer. I'd rather just open the gate and turn them out to the grass. And we were doing like 20 to 25 litres off grass this spring. Really good fats and proteins, and it's probably the most, although we're not on calved herd, it's probably the most profitable milk months of milk production we had this year was May and June. So I think everybody has their system, and no one system's perfect, but for us, getting them out the grass is imperative to our business and our profitability that we make on the farm.
I don't know if perhaps our scientists want to comment on that. I appreciate across the board, getting those, and it's been talked about perhaps by all our panelists, around young stock and getting them to, the weights that are necessary. But maybe, I don't know, Gillian, Francis, if you want to maybe come in on that point around performance.
On getting the performance from grass, or just in general?
Yeah. Well, the point, I suppose, that I was putting, or the question put in the chat or in the Q&A to you there was, grass being difficult to manage, and I don't doubt. I drive in and out the avenue to Hillsborough, and I don't doubt, despite it's probably better than what I've left at home, there are challenges at Hillsborough, just as there have been throughout the country this year. But in terms of achieving performance, on more consistent diets, easier to regulate. But, Hugh has made his points, and I'm just interested in the scientists' thoughts on those comparisons.
We did some work a few years ago looking at rotational grazing and sort of grazing in terms of what percentage body weight per animal. And we were actually able to manage growing heifers and pregnant heifers quite well on grass without any concentrate. until the weather turned not exactly summery in August. I think it was maybe in 2019, and we had a very wet spell, and that was when we found the consistent growth to be very difficult to manage. We also added in, we had a bit of a look at concentrated, feeding a bit of concentrate at grass. Normally that would be done in a group feeder. Here we do have a couple of research tools where we have a performance hub, and we're able to use those to deliver concentrate feed at the depending on the body weight of the animal and the growth of the animal. And we found that if you do come to your period of wet weather where you have animals out grazing and you need to add in concentrate, where we were using the tailored individual concentrate, we were ending up with a much more consistent batch. If you have a group of animals out grazing, the weather turns bad or the grass quality isn't that good, even with concentrate, you can end up with a very inconsistent batch of young stock by the end of the summer that could be more difficult to put on track. So yes, it can be difficult to manage grass. It might be easier in the house on a consistent diet. You know exactly what the cattle are getting, but you also, I suppose, where the dairy industry particularly is facing a lot of public scrutiny, and people still do want to see animals out at grass. So I think when you take into account sort of the public perspective of that, having animals out at grass in their natural habitat is good from that point of view. And if it can be managed and animals are monitored regularly, you should be able to grow them okay on grazed grass and make the best use of the natural resources that you have. And as you said, you don't need to be scraping out cubicles in the middle of the summer, but the Northern Irish weather does
Prove it
throw a lot of softball, curveballs in the way.
And
Okay,
David,
listen. Sorry, Francis.
No, I was just going to say, David, housing will increase ammonia emissions, which we very much need to avoid.
Yeah.
So getting out to grass and staying out of grass as long as possible is a big strategy to reduce ammonia emissions.
Yeah, just one last question then, folks, has come in here, and I'm maybe going to let each of the farmers, make a quick comment, because I think actually in what we've seen, you probably are all using red and white clovers. But maybe James, will start with you. In terms of the benefit of clover, obviously in your mixed species swards, I'm sure clover's a big part of that. Hugh's described how he's not putting artificial nitrogen on some of these fields and growing just as much grass. But in terms of red clover, perhaps even just a comment from each of you, and then we'll close our webinar. James.
Yeah, well, we have been using red clover now for a few years, and certainly, again, we're making the meals there for the feed to young calves, and we have a high protein silage with no nitrogen fertilizer. It's all grown just on slurry applied after each cut. We've taken 2-3 cuts of bales, and then we're turning young lambs in to finish them on that red clover as well. So we're seeing the benefit there of production without nitrogen. The drawback is it doesn't last, and even good management, and I'm learning from mistakes. It's difficult to manage as a crop. Yeah.
Frank, maybe do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, the red and white clover there, we've had most every grass mix we've been putting in now has got white clover, and certain ones with red, but it's over the past couple of years, the past 3 in particular, we're definitely putting the red in. Red clover, I'd encourage anyone to put in any mix at this sort of stage now. If you're putting it in, it's fixing nitrogen from day dot since it's going in its first year, rather than your white clover. Your white clover's taking more into the second year just before it's doing anything. The big benefits, well, the real thing, if the red clover, yes, as James is saying, the persistency trying to last, but we have stuff there up again 5 years. It's still not as high a percentage as also that's sold on farm, but it's still doing its purpose. It's still fixing nitrogen and bringing some form into the mix. So I'll be putting it in regardless of that sort of way. But for grazing cattle now, bloat is a bit of an issue now, as we've found out the hard way a few times now. But it's keeping an eye on them, and especially in the wet weather, watching the cattle, making sure you don't turn them hungry into a paddock that's full of rich clover, or they'll cause issues in that sort of way. But no, it definitely has a place to play in farms, and I'd be encouraging anyone to be putting it in now and giving it a go. So.
Hugh, I think you maybe have referenced this, but maybe final word to you if you're still behind the screen there, in terms of red clover and clovers in the mix?
Yeah, no, I'm still here. Sorry, I'm juggling my son here at the minute. He's
You're all right. Keep your camera off.
I'm babysitting here. No, look, we have red clovers in our multi-species mix, and we've kind of sleepwalked into growing them. They've done really well, and it's, as Frank says, it's, you know, I think it's something that I've learned recently is that, you know, that they're fixing nitrogen from day dot as soon as they get in compared to the white clover, and we're going to try and establish some on an outblock that we have for silage making, just pure silage making, and we're also going to try and include it in some of our grazing swords as well. So yeah, look, it's another tool in the box to try and increase our profitability and ultimately try and reduce our carbon footprint. And it's something that, you know, we as a business and a farm are very poor at clovers, and it's something we're going to have to try and improve going forward. And it's a learning process, I think, and it's just something we have to try and embrace.
Okay, listen, folks, thank you very much to all our panelists for your presentations and indeed taking part in our Q&A. Could I just remind you folks that the survey will appear up when the webinar's closed down. So if you're willing to stay on for a moment or two and fill in that would be helpful to AFBI and to those who are working on webinars in the incoming weeks. And just to finally remind you that next week, that webinar on the 3rd of October is on resilient grassland management. So look forward to seeing you again next week and indeed in the incoming weeks throughout October each Tuesday evening. Thank you for attending our webinar, and well, I almost tend to say safe journey home, but appreciate that most of you just have to make it down the hall or up the stairs. So thank you for joining us tonight, and take care.